As memorial events take place for the Queen, vast swathes of the country have been told to stop what they're doing or put their lives on hold. But in King Charles's former official residence, it's all change. Up to 100 Clarence House staff have been told they could be about to lose their jobs. It's a message they received while they were working around the clock to smooth Charles's elevation to the throne. The Guardian report private secretaries, the finance office, the communications team and household staff are among those who received notice during the Thanksgiving service for the Queen at St Giles's Cathedral in Edinburgh on Monday that their posts were on the line. Many staff had assumed they would be amalgamated into the King's new household, claiming they were given no indication of what was coming until the letter from Sir Clive Alderton, the King's top aide, arrived. One source said, "Everybody is absolutely livid, including private secretaries and the senior team. All the staff have been working late every night since Thursday to be met with this. People were visibly shaken by it." A Clarence House spokesperson has said they will be working to find alternative jobs for those whose current roles are no longer required, but they say some redundancies will be inevitable. The leader of the Civil Service Union is not impressed. He said this: "While some changes across the households were to be expected as roles across the royal family change, the scale and speed at which this has been announced is callous in the extreme, least of all because we do not know what staffing the incoming Prince of Wales and his family might need." Oh, and it all seems pretty shabby, doesn't it?
It just sums it up, I think, quite acutely, the British class system, doesn't it? Where privilege is worshipped. And yet, whilst we're told that we're in this period of national mourning and grief and uniting as a country, people are thrown onto the scrap heap at the very moment when that mourning is taking place. Look, I've had someone get in touch with me, which I'm going to write about, but their partner was involved in construction at Windsor Castle. On a Friday morning, after he went into work, they explained they had to close down the site due to mourning. As he's a contractor, that meant no notice, no pay, just had to make the site secure and leave. I do understand to some degrees there was a lot going on at Windsor Castle, but for a young family, this has put us in dire straits, and I feel resentment, as this is nothing to do with us. I have respect for the deaf and old lady, but that's about it. We still need to eat. Look, these are real human beings with lives, and this idea that, in a period of national mourning that, normal life has to be suspended because everyone has to grieve. People's living costs aren't suspended. Their need to live isn't suspended. Their children's needs aren't suspended. If we're talking about humanity, because at the moment people like us, but we're indecent, how dare you? This isn't the time to complain. We're all uniting as a country. Tell that to someone like that, whose partner's just been thrown out of work with no notice from Windsor Castle because of an event that is completely out of their control, which they have no prior notice for whatsoever. You can't unite a country when you throw precarious workers onto the scrap heap and told that that's a necessary sacrifice in the name of national mourning. Rich people aren't making these sacrifices. The sacrifices in every national event like this are expected to fall, as ever, on the back of the royal subjects, often who are consigned to the bottom of society, for whom, life is already very, very difficult and very hard. So I think this sums up, again, what happens. It shines a light, I suppose, in Technicolor, on the fact that we have a low-paid, precarious workforce who are treated like shit in this country. And that obviously continues and is accelerated when all of a sudden we're expected to, doff our caps at the monarchy during a period of national mourning.
I think you're absolutely right. This does shine lights on much sort of bigger structural problems of insecurity in the workplace. I think it also does, on a mundane level, on a local level, how many millions of pounds are being spent on the ceremonies, which we've been seeing over the past few days, over the past week, and it'll be going until next Monday. How many hundreds of millions of pounds has this cost? And they can't just have some little pot of money here for contractors who've had to end their jobs early because of all of these celebrations or commemorations or whatever we want to call them. Like, how cheap do you have to be? Or how unthinking do you have to be? I think it's probably that latter. They haven't considered that. Well, this is the contract. Of course, we're going to cut it. Right? How many other contracts have been broken this week because half of London has been shut down? You know what I mean? And then they'll just throw people on the scrap heap. Up to 100 people work at Clarence House. If you're going to do some restructuring, just wait a month. Jesus Christ. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, regardless of how Charles may or may not behave, a week of royal propaganda appears to be doing its work. A new poll from YouGov suggests 63% of the public think Charles will make a good king. Only 15% think he won't. And what's really interesting here is how this compares to when people were previously asked the same question. So from June 2019 to May 2022, there were never more than 39% of people who said Charles would make a good king. Around 30% of people consistently said he would not make a good king. But it's now a 65-15 split. That is a phenomenal transformation. Like, polls don't normally shift that dramatically. I mean, what do you make of this? Is this down to the success of the royal propaganda we've seen over the past week? Is this people feeling sympathy for someone who's lost their mother? Why have we seen this huge, dramatic turnaround when it comes to how suitable people think Charles is to become king, or to be king as he is now?
I think it's very unsurprising. I mean, look, I don't want to just reduce people in terms of their agency to just being pawns of the media. I think that's overly simplistic. But I mean, it's quite an interesting study about immigration, for example, which the Financial Times did, which showed that there was no correlation at all between hostility to migrants and the level of immigration. There's higher immigration than ever, but anti-migrant sentiment is actually very low by historic levels. But there is a correlation between anti-migrant sentiment and hostile pieces in the media. Now, that seems a bit of a bizarre segue, but the point I'm just making is that clearly the media and media coverage has a massive influence on people's views, their attitudes. And at the moment, it's just wall-to-wall coverage about the monarchy. It's been said, I guess the message being either explicitly or implicitly spread is if you're not actively showing some sort of grief, or you're not taking part in any way in that mourning, then that makes you kind of indecent and wrong and someone who hates your own country. I don't think genuinely that those people have seen Prince Charles's public appearances, which have been quite tetchy. Let's be honest with you, at least one of them was quite tetchy, aggressively tetchy towards, let's say, the underlings. I don't think people looked at that and went, "Do you know what? I've completely changed my mind. Oh, I thought he'd be rubbish before, but I think he's going to make a bloody good king." People just think he's lost his mom. I feel that I should be involved in this national mourning. I feel like I'll be a bad person if I suddenly say what I thought about Charles. But to be honest with you, the polling's very clear. Before he became king, he's a far more divisive figure than the Queen. That's because the Queen, I think, cultivated a certain aloofness, which made it hard for Republicans like us to build up substantial opposition to the institution of monarchy. Let's be honest, she did public appearances where she didn't really say very much. Basically, her presence in our lives were largely confined to the Christmas address, which were Christmas speech, which were pretty platitudinous and inoffensive, normally speaking. Nothing much to rile anyone up. So she was quite, she's covered in mystique and all the rest of it. She was a bit of an off-screen character in our lives in lots of ways. But Charles is far more interventionist. He's got a history of meddling in politics. He clearly is tetchier and more easily provoked. He has a back history, which is more controversial if we think about, without going, too heavily into people's private lives, though we can't really help with the monarchy because they're shoved in our faces all the time. But I think lots of people remember what happened with Diana and Camilla and all the rest of it. I don't think that sits well with lots of people. So I think, at the moment, there's hysteria, basically. Let's just be frank about it. People are being made to feel you've got to be mourning. Don't say anything bad about the monarchy. Be nice about someone who's grieving his mum. But I think that support that you've just seen the increase is very soft. And I think when he's bedded in, so to speak, as our king, and I think he's going to make quite a lot of missteps, because I think already he's verging on missteps. I think a lot of those soft, sudden supporters or believers in him as a good king, I think are just going to go back to where they were before, which is not convinced by this guy in the way I quite like the Queen. And I think the monarchy's lost their star player. I think if you look at younger people and people of colour, and obviously people of colour are growing in numbers, they're often younger as well, so there is very substantial support for a republic that's growing as those generations become, obviously they rise. And I think the monarchy's future, therefore, as the lid on a pressure cooker, is less firm on a more combustible pot, because the tensions of British society have increased over the last few years, and they've lost their star player. Public sympathy for the monarchy support was already less enthusiastic than it was. Can King Charles III carry the monarchy in the same way? I don't think he'll end up like King Charles I, who obviously, there was a massive civil war and revolution. He was beheaded. But I do think he will find it much harder to sustain the level of passive enthusiasm that the Queen had.